Good evening, statistics class. Well, I guess maybe good morning to you guys. I'm recording this the night before, but welcome to your AMI video. Today, I 100% was gonna give you a pretest. Well, today as in like the 8th, right? The Wednesday. Just to see how you guys are and what types of things we need to go a lot more in depth on, which is why those your first question on the AMI form yesterday was what types of things were you more familiar with and whatnot. Um, but welcome to statistics. Statistics is an interesting class. It's a class I find extremely fascinating in terms of content. Now, out of the big four that I teach, statistics, college algebra, pre-calc, and calculus, statistics is kind of my weaker link, but no worries because I've been locking in and researching a lot of different stuff about it. Well, and the reason why statistics is a little bit tougher for me is because it's a lot more reading comprehensive, and I've always been a slow reader. Um, and you have to think and look deeply at different data so that way you can interpret it. Now, there is the data interpretation side of statistics, and then there's also the combinatorics probability side, like finding the probability of taking three cards out and they're all being spades, right? That's the other classic one. But then there's a data interpretation side, which is a lot of the meat and potatoes of statistics. So there's like the branch of stats, and then there's the branch of probability. Now, what do I have written on this board, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. I assume you asked. If you didn't, then that's kind of embarrassing. But let me share the screen with you. Hopefully it pops up. And I'm really hoping that, oh, perfect. Okay. I think this is like okay. So can I move my window? I hope you guys can see the screen share. If you don't, then this is just going to be the worst video I've ever made in my life. But I think you can. Um, so back in the day, as in like 2 years ago, when the seniors were sophomores and the juniors were freshmen, my very first stats class, I actually sent out a poll to all my students that I had at the time, but like what they thought the best sandals were, best smear of choice. Uses until your towel is considered dirty. That's an interesting one. And kind of took some data and see what people thought. And these were all students that I had 2 years ago. So the population would be students that Mr. Mazzola had that responded to this as their warm up. And the one I want to look at a little bit more deeply is this uses until your towel is considered dirty one, because all of the others are considered categorical data, but this is considered quantitative data. Now, the difference between the categorical data and quantitative, quantity means counting, right? It's got the N in it, versus qualitative has an L, and that's usually used to describe things. Like best sandal class, this is all the options were words, right? But here we actually got numbers as the options here, which means we can actually use some math to kind of calculate some of the different central tendency modes or central tendencies that we have. Central tendency being mean, median, mode, right? That's the classic three. There's also a few others, but regardless, let's take a look here. We had 79 respondents to this question. And I know it's alarming that some people probably memed on it and said like, hey, 7, because I never watch stuff. I'm really hoping they were memeing with there. But what's alarming is that we have some craziness going on here. We have a lot of data here. Now, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and explain how to find a mean quickly. Now, mean is the average where you add them all up and divide by however many there are, right? However, the problem here is that you would have to add up 79 different numbers, but there's a quick way to add a bunch of the same numbers, and that operation is called multiplication. So this is a crazy way of writing out adding them all up. So this little symbol right here means sum. It's a capital sigma. Don't laugh. It's actually the Greek letter for that. So it means add them all up. And then this whole fraction bar means divide by however many are. This x sub I is saying all the different points. And this part is the probability of the points. But here we're not actually finding probability. So I probably misused this and said the expected value maybe. So, which well, we're actually going to go through the actual formula in about a week or so. But there were 5 people that responded 0 times plus 14 people that responded 1 time. That's just saying 1 plus 1 plus 1 14 times. And then so on and so forth. All divided by 79. And when you went through with it, you had 206 over 79, which you're going to use a calculator. In fact, stats is a lot of calculator stuff. So you guys get first dibs on the calculators that I have in class. The TI-84 plus silver editions that we all know and love. But then we got 2.6 is our mean. Versus our median and mode were both 3. And I'll tell you how to get those too. So now I'm going to actually share it again. The median is the middle. It's just like when you're driving, right? When you're driving and it's smack dab in the middle on the highway, right? That's what the median's called. So it's the same thing with math, which means list them all up and divide by or find whatever is smack dab in the middle. Now, the thing is, you could just list out 0, 0, 0, 0 5 times, make sure they're in order, right? But the quicker way to do that is you got 79 respondents, right? So the middle part should be within around 40 or 39. So check to see where 39 and 40 are if you were to list them all out. Well, this would be the 6 mark right here, because right after 5. And then this would be the 19th or 20th mark right here. This would be the 38th mark, meaning that the middle would fall somewhere in that 3 range. So that would be the median. And the mode is the most often occurring number, which here is also 3. So we can confidently say that our middle, the average number or the expected number of people, if we were to randomly select all of my students from that year, then the person should say that their answer is probably around 2 to 3, which is kind of gross, because we're saying towel is considered dirty after 3 uses. It starts getting crusty, and I don't even want to think about that. So, nah. Unless you're talking about like a hand towel for drying your hands, maybe after you wash them, then you can make that argument. But we could go into that in a lot more detail later on. But with that being said, your Google form is going to have 3 different types of questions that I want you to actually answer. So let me actually pull it up. If you were to actually make a question, right? Just like the ones that we had over here. So if you want inspiration, because I had all my students in that class. Well, I only had 4 in that hour at that time. So we were able to actually have some creative liberty. If you were to make one of these questions, like it could be a silly one, and you want to collect data on it, and you're actually kind of interested to think about that, what would it be? And you're going to put that right here. And make sure to list out choices, because if you don't list out choices and you have an open-ended question, one, you're going to get some crazy data that you're not going to really interpret, because like if someone's like, oh, my favorite cereal is Trix, and then someone else wrote Trix, but they wrote it with a lowercase t, that's considered a different answer, and that's going to be a pain in the head to try to actually interpret. So make sure you got your multiple choice questions. Plus, if you're dealing with high schoolers, if it's a free response question, that is a that is a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. The other questions being, how would you find approaching the average favorite number of Moberly students? Like, how would you investigate that? I'm actually curious, because we're actually going to go into this in a lot more detail. In fact, actually, that's our final project, is doing this type of thing. But I want to see where you guys are, right? There's no wrong answers, unless you're like, huh, ask them the alphabet, and see which ones they like more. No, it's trying to do favorite number. And then the stat of the day. The stat of the day is actually one of my favorite things we do in stats. So stats is one of those classes where you literally see it all the time without even knowing. So I want you to pick out a topic, because usually we just go on in board, like we do this at the end of every class, or at least try to see some of the actual data that's out there and some stats that are out there. Because, I mean, stats is one of those classes where you actually, it's one of the most useful classes you could ever take. Because not only are you going to learn all the math behind it, but you're also going to learn some of the things that people do to try to manipulate the stats into their favor. Just find a topic like statistics of, and then whatever topic you're thinking of. Like today I was talking about guitar, or I was actually practicing earlier. So I was like statistics of guitar players, and I found this article. It's like 16 million Americans learned to play guitar in the last 2 years, and this is as of I think 2021, right? And we're going to go in a lot more detail with actually learning how to read these too, and seeing if we could pick out any of the fallacies that we find. There's obviously a lot of data, but 72% of new players are between those ages. Now, how do we know that this is actually good data? Well, we don't. But if you look at the bottom, there's typically like the methodology stuff. If they got some methodology stuff, and they got the company that actually took this data, which is YouGov. YouGov is a nice little reliable source. But if it was just some Joe Schmo high school kid that like asked everybody around his neighborhood, then that's not going to be a good representation of the population that you're trying to do. Unless you're talking about that neighborhood in general, then yeah, that'd be good. But yeah. And this is about Fender too. And maybe Fender might have been kind of biased toward this because they want to sell more guitars. So they're like, oh, all these people are learning. You could too. And they try to sell more guitars that way, or at least funded this type of data. That's also something to take into consideration. But reading through some of this stuff, we just kind of look through it and see if there's any cool statistics that pop out. Um, yeah, I personally learned guitar during COVID because I had nothing else to do. And I was like, this is something I've always wanted to do. And I was an expert at Guitar Hero. So I'm like, oh, bet. This is literally right up my alley. But yeah, usually you hit a plateau. And that's what it was like leveling up. And then starting is the hard part, but sticking with it is the even harder part. 1 in 4 have stagnated in their progress, proving that starting is hard, but continuing might just be harder. And that's like the typical thing for New Year's resolutions, too, is that they start strong, but keeping up with it is a routine that's pretty hard to do, especially if you got different stuff coming out at you all at once. But yeah, cool. So look up your own stat of the day. Like, I'm actually curious to see what type of stat you find and post your findings. And then we might be able to look through it as a class, maybe. But that is all I got. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope to see you guys on Thursday.